She laughed in his face, called him a nobody. And 7 minutes later, he placed her in handcuffs. The courtroom fell silent. No one expected the shift. Not the prosecutor, not the bailiff, and certainly not Judge Karen Simmons, who now stared at the very man she just mocked, her authority slipping from her grasp like sand. But rewind just 7 minutes. It started like any other hearing. The buzz of soft conversations, the shuffle of papers, people looking bored, tired, until the judge entered the room, heels sharp, eyes sharper. "Let's get this over with," she muttered, plopping into her seat like royalty on a throne. Marcus Reed stood at the defendant's table, black, confident, impeccably dressed, his presence quiet but undeniable. To Simmons, that was already too much. "People like you," she said, loud enough for the courtroom to catch every syllable. "Always think the rules don't apply. Always looking for a shortcut." Marcus didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in less elegant rooms. But when she leaned forward and narrowed her eyes, her voice dipped into something colder. "You're not special, Mr. Reed. You're just another nobody, wasting this court's time." Gasps, whispers. Even the clerk paused mid-keystroke. Marcus calmly reached into his coat. Not for a weapon, not for a trick, but for something far more devastating. He laid a small badge on the table, gently, deliberately, then looked the judge straight in the eye. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Reed," he said. "FBI." The badge caught the courtroom lights. The golden letters gleamed. The air cracked. The judge blinked once, twice, then laughed. A dry, brittle thing. "Nice prop," she sneered. "You think that's going to scare me?" Marcus didn't speak. Instead, he pulled out a folded document and laid it beside the badge. She didn't even look at it. "Save the theater," she scoffed. But Marcus stepped forward, eyes calm, voice measured. "No theater, Your Honor. That," he pointed at the paper, "is a federal warrant, and you are under investigation." The entire courtroom stopped breathing, long before Judge Simmons sneered at him across that courtroom. Marcus Reed had seen how power worked. He didn't grow up wanting to be a federal agent. He grew up just trying to survive. In a rough corner of Baltimore, he watched his mother work 3 jobs. Watched his uncle get pulled from the front porch in handcuffs, without cause. Watched neighbors disappear into a system that never gave them the benefit of the doubt. By the time he was 12, he'd already memorized what not to say to the police. How to keep his hands visible. How to breathe without looking like a threat. But Marcus was different. He studied, he listened, and most importantly, he remembered. Every insult, every slammed door, every teacher who looked surprised when he aced the test. By the time he made it into the FBI, he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He just wanted the truth. And he wanted people like Simmons to stop getting away with everything. Because this case, it wasn't random. It wasn't some courtroom drama that spun out of control. It was a setup, and Marcus had known for weeks. Simmons wasn't just rude or prejudiced. She was corrupt. Dozens of complaints buried under bureaucracy. Unfiled reports. Bail decisions that made no sense. And worst of all, anonymous tip-offs to defense lawyers about evidence disappearing. It took Marcus months of quiet work, tracking patterns, interviewing scared clerks, cross-referencing sealed files, until one pattern stood out. Simmons had been quietly funneling favorable rulings to defendants connected to a certain lobbying firm. A lobbying firm whose founder had once been her campaign donor. But he needed more. He needed to see it with his own eyes, to feel her arrogance firsthand, to let her speak without filter, So when the final moment came, the whole world would see what he'd always known. That power, unchecked, becomes poison. And so he stepped into that courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a mirror, letting her reflect exactly who she was. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. Let her dig the hole herself. And when the moment came, he reached into his jacket, not for vengeance, but for truth. Because this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about revenge. It was about all the people who'd sat before her and left with broken lives. And now, it was her turn to explain herself. When the courtroom door closed behind Judge Simmons, everything changed. The air felt heavier. The silence, louder. Even the marble floors, usually so polished and cold, seemed to absorb the tension still hanging in the air. The bailiff, a man who'd worked under Simmons for nearly a decade, stood frozen with the warrant in his hands. His voice, when he finally spoke, cracked just slightly. "Your Honor." Then he stopped, corrected himself. "Ms. Simmons, I need you to stand." That moment, right there, was when the entire courtroom realized the system had just blinked. For years, Judge Simmons had ruled from that bench like she was untouchable. But now, she was the one waiting for instructions. And Marcus, he didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't smile. He just stood there, watching, because the real test wasn't her. It was them. The other judge now called in to oversee the room. The assistant district attorney, now pale as paper. The clerks, the security guards. Even the janitor, frozen in the back doorway, mop still in hand. Everyone was waiting to see what the system would do, now that the mask was off. Would it circle the wagons to protect its own? Or finally admit that something had gone wrong? The bailiff stepped forward again, slower this time. He didn't reach for Simmons. Instead, he looked to the substitute judge, an older man named Clifford Briggs, a man with tired eyes, but a reputation for fairness. Briggs cleared his throat, looked around the room, and then he nodded. "Proceed with the arrest." Just like that, it became real. The click of the handcuffs, the collective intake of breath. Even the prosecutor, who had once smirked beside Simmons, now stared at the floor, unsure whether to speak or disappear. Marcus walked to the edge of the courtroom, leaned toward the assistant DA, and said quietly, "I have enough evidence to open a full investigation. Her rulings, her finances, the missing case files." The man blinked once, then nodded. No arguments, no excuses, because they all knew. This wasn't just about a judge. It was about a crack in the armor, a reminder that even the ones who wear the robe aren't immune to accountability. Outside, word had already spread. A crowd was gathering on the courthouse steps. Phones out, cameras rolling, not for drama, but for justice. Because for once, the system wasn't closing ranks. It was listening. And inside that room, with Simmons led away in cuffs, something rare had happened. The law didn't just protect power, it had challenged it. Back at the federal office downtown, Marcus Reed stood in front of the glass wall of his supervisor's office, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't smiling. What had just happened in that courtroom was only the beginning. Now came the fallout. Inside the office, Special Agent in Charge Denise Holloway flipped through a folder filled with documents, transcripts, emails, and sworn statements. All of it. Evidence against Judge Simmons. Behind her glasses, her eyes were sharp but unreadable. "You do realize," she said without looking up, "this move could set off a political storm, right?" Marcus didn't blink. She crossed a line. "She's a judge," Holloway replied. "An elected official, well-connected. And now, under federal custody." Marcus leaned forward. "She called me a nobody. In open court, in front of a jury. Before she even looked at the facts. Holloway finally looked up. "Did you let your emotions get the best of you?" "No." He said it so clearly, so calmly, that it didn't even sound like a defense. It sounded like a warning. "I've been building this case for 6 months," Marcus continued. "Anonymous complaints, internal memos, sealed case files that disappeared after verdicts, all pointing to her. She thought no one was watching." Holloway tapped her pen against the folder. "And you decided today was the day to act?" Marcus nodded. "Because she wasn't just arrogant, she was dangerous." A long silence passed. Then, she closed the folder. "All right," Holloway said quietly. "But this isn't over." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It's just starting." Meanwhile, across the city, Judge Simmons sat in a small, windowless room at a federal processing center. Her hair, usually perfect, was slightly undone. Her lipstick faded, but her fury still intact. The agent interviewing her, a young man with nervous eyes, placed a document on the table. "You're being investigated for judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power," he said. Simmons scoffed. "Investigated, not convicted." The agent didn't respond, just slid the paper closer. On it was a list, names, dates, and cases. Cases that had all been assigned to her. Cases where defendants had mysteriously disappeared or pleaded guilty under pressure. Simmons stared at the page. No fear, just rage. "You think you're going to bring me down with rumors and paperwork?" she snapped. The agent stayed quiet. "Tell Agent Reed," she hissed. "He better be ready, because I'm not going down easy." Back in the office, Marcus stared at the screen. On it, security footage from a courthouse hallway. Simmons, in conversation with a man wearing a district attorney's badge. No audio, just body language. Tense, shady, wrong. Marcus hit pause. Whatever Simmons was hiding, it wasn't just about her. And this case was about to go deeper than anyone expected. 3 days later, a plain envelope arrived at the federal building. No return address. Just one word, typed in bold across the front. Proof. Marcus stood at the evidence table, gloved hands slicing it open. Inside, a flash drive and a single printed note. "Check the folder marked 8:47 a.m. No name, no signature." He plugged the drive into the secure terminal. A folder popped open. Inside, a series of courthouse security files, video footage. One file matched the time, 8:47 a.m., dated 6 months prior. He clicked it. The footage began. A hallway outside courtroom 3C. Judge Simmons, standing alone at first. Then a man approached, well-dressed, balding, holding a manila folder. Marcus leaned in. The man, Elliot Stryker, a known fixer for political figures in Louisiana. And the folder, it was handed to Simmons. She opened it, glanced inside, nodded. They didn't speak, not once, just exchanged a look. Then, they walked away in opposite directions. Marcus paused the video, zoomed in on the folder. A case name was barely visible. State V.J. Mendoza. His blood ran cold. Jorge Mendoza. A case that had mysteriously disappeared from the docket. A case involving a whistleblower who was never seen again. Marcus turned to the agent beside him. "Get me every file we have on Mendoza and find out where Elliot Stryker is right now." The agent nodded and ran off. That night, Marcus sat in his car outside an upscale restaurant in downtown Baton Rouge. Elliot Stryker had reservations. Marcus wasn't here to eat. When Stryker stepped outside, Marcus stepped in front of him. "Evening," he said calmly. Stryker blinked. "Do I know you?" Marcus held up his badge. "You do now." Stryker's fake smile dropped like a mask. "I have nothing to say." "You will," Marcus replied, pulling out a tablet. He played the hallway footage. paused it on the moment Stryker handed Simmons the folder. "That's conspiracy to obstruct justice," Marcus said. On camera, Stryker's hands trembled. "This doesn't end with Simmons," Marcus said. "But if you help me, you might walk away with something other than a sentence." Stryker looked around, then nodded. The next morning, Marcus stood before a federal task force. On the screen behind him, a flow chart. At the center, Judge Simmons. Lines extended outward to city officials, defense attorneys, private investigators, and at the end of one thick red arrow, 3 names, all defendants, all dead, all ruled accidental. The room went silent. "This isn't just corruption," Marcus said. "This is a network." And Simmons was the linchpin. He turned toward the wall of agents. "We take it down today." Judge Simmons didn't sleep that night. She sat in her dimly lit study, whiskey untouched, phone face down. She had heard rumors. Something was coming. The courthouse felt colder the next morning. The usual glances were sharper, the whispers louder. By 9:15 a.m., she was halfway through her docket when the doors flew open. Federal agents poured into the courtroom like a silent wave. Leading them, Marcus, badge displayed, eyes locked on her. Judge Simmons rose slowly. "Excuse me?" she said, voice strained. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus didn't blink. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we have a warrant. Signed this morning by the Eastern District." He handed the document to the bailiff. The entire room froze. Gasps. The courtroom clerk dropped her pen. Simmons scanned the paper, her face flushed, lips tightening. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I have not been informed." "You are now," Marcus said. "Step down from the bench." The silence was suffocating. Simmons glanced at her gavel, then at Marcus. "This is a mistake," she said. "No," Marcus replied. "This is accountability." She made a sudden move, reached for her robe, as if to shield herself. But 2 agents stepped forward, firm but calm. "You'll be treated with dignity," Marcus said. "More than you gave others." Simmons's voice cracked. "You can't do this to me." "We already have," he replied. She looked around, but no one came to her defense. The room, once hers to command, now stared back with quiet condemnation. The agents escorted her away. Every step echoed. Later that afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a press conference. Reporters packed the lot. Flashes snapped. He took a breath. "Today's arrest is not about revenge," he said. "It's about restoring trust in a system that failed too many, too often." Behind him, photos of victims. Faces forgotten by the court, but never by Marcus. He looked into the cameras, to those watching. If you've ever been silenced, dismissed, or made invisible, know this: the badge doesn't protect the corrupt, and the robe doesn't excuse the unjust. He stepped away as the cameras rolled. His mission wasn't over, but this chapter, this battle, was won. The courtroom was quiet again, but this time for a different reason. The gavel wasn't on Simmons's bench anymore. It was locked away in an evidence box. Marcus sat in the back pew, alone. His suit jacket draped over the seat beside him. He looked tired, but not broken. The justice system had finally blinked. He had pulled off something unthinkable, a federal takedown of a sitting judge, on her turf, in her courtroom, and still, he didn't feel victorious. Outside, reporters gathered near the courthouse steps. They shouted his name, asking for one more quote, one more headline. He didn't move, because while the crowd celebrated, he was still mourning for every case Simmons had corrupted, every voice silenced by her gavel, every name buried under case dismissed, or worse, guilty. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. His phone buzzed. It was an email from Internal Affairs. A list of cases Simmons had presided over in the last 10 years. Dozens were being reopened. He exhaled, relief laced with weight. This would take months. Years, maybe. His work was far from done. A knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Claire Dawson, the mother of a young man wrongly sentenced 3 years ago by Simmons. She had sat through every hearing this week. Her voice was soft. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Marcus nodded, but before he could answer, her eyes welled up. "You gave us something we haven't had in a long time," she whispered. Hope. That word. It hit him harder than any court ruling. Not justice, not vengeance, hope. He rose, shook her hand gently, then turned toward the exit. As he stepped into the evening air, a breeze carried through the streets. The courthouse behind him bathed in golden light. It almost looked peaceful, but Marcus knew better. Systems don't change in a day. Power doesn't surrender easily. He had won a battle, not the war. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from the bureau. Another judge, another case, another courthouse. He slipped the phone into his pocket, straightened his tie, took one last look at the building behind him, then walked forward. Not as a man chasing justice, but as justice. Finally, chasing back. Somewhere across town, a girl sat on the edge of her bed. She was 16, black, brilliant, and angry. Not the kind of anger that lashes out, but the kind that burns slow. The kind that turns into purpose. She had watched the footage of the trial, of the arrest, of the moment a black federal agent took down a corrupt white judge, with nothing more than the law on his side. She replayed that moment, over and over, like it was church, because for her, it was. It was the first time she'd seen someone who looked like her. Not just survive the system, but beat it. Her mother knocked on the door. "You okay, baby?" She nodded. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." Her mother smiled softly. "About what?" "About law school," she whispered. Across the city, a man was released from a holding cell, wrongfully detained 3 years ago under Judge Simmons. He stepped into the sunlight with his daughter holding his hand. She looked up at him like he was a superhero. He looked at her like he finally believed it. And back in his apartment, Marcus stared out the window, coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. Inside that folder, a new case, a new name, a new lie waiting to be dragged into the light. He didn't smile, he didn't relax, but he felt steady. Because sometimes justice isn't a gavel, it's a mirror. Sometimes it's not about what you punish, but what you reveal. Marcus knew the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to. But now, he was redesigning it, one case at a time. This story, it didn't end with applause or a perfect ending. Because real justice doesn't wrap up in an hour. It stretches, it resists, it bleeds, but it also breathes. In every kid who decides they won't just survive, they'll fight. In every voice that says, "Not this time." In every Marcus Reed who walks into a courtroom not asking for power, but demanding accountability. And maybe that's what scares the system most. Not our anger, not our protests, not even our badges, but our resilience, our refusal to bow, our insistence that power answer to truth, not the other way around. Because justice, real justice, doesn't just knock. It kicks the damn door open. If this story moved you, if it made you question, reflect, or feel something, then don't just scroll past it. Because stories like these aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that behind every courtroom door, every badge, every robe is a person, and sometimes a reckoning. Here on KaYi, we don't tell stories to make noise. We tell them to make change. So, if you believe in justice that dares to look deeper, truth that refuses to stay buried, and voices that won't be silenced, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because this is more than a channel. This is a movement. One story at a time. You're watching KaYi, where truth isn't just spoken, it's amplified.